as the last few people are filtering in after lunch. Welcome to our session this afternoon, which is entitled Strengthening National Evaluation Systems Through Accessible, Actionable, and Relevant Evidence. My name is Thomas Kelly. I'm from the International Initiative for Impact Evaluation, or 3IE, and I'll be the moderator for this session this afternoon. I'll give a very brief introduction of the session and an introduction of our speakers. And then we will have three speakers here this afternoon for the session. It was originally planned to be 4 speakers, but we have just 3. So I'll invite the speakers to be fulsome in your remarks. You don't have to hold back. And more importantly, I'll invite those of you who are here listening to the session to feel free to not only ask questions, but participate with your own experiences that you bring from your diverse backgrounds as well. So let me begin with a very brief introduction of the session. This session will showcase the work of 3 different organizations that take different approaches to creating partnership with government and creating partnership that is credible and partnerships that can be sustained over time. We will hear from them about what it means to be responsive to government partners and also their takeaways for suggestions for increasing locally led evaluations. The motivation for this session, or for this panel discussion I should say, is to move from theory to high-level ideas to practical engagement directly with counterparts in government who are key decision makers. So with that motivation then, let me introduce our 3 panelists, our 3 presenters today. I'll begin to my right with Candice Morkel. Many of you will have heard from Candice this morning at our plenary session. Candice is the director of the Center for Learning on Evaluation and Results of Anglophone Africa, or CLEAR AA. She's also a senior lecturer in monitoring and evaluation at Wits University. She has over 25 years experience in government, academics, and the nonprofit sector, specializing in development, monitoring and evaluation, and public policy. As director of CLEAR AA, she works with governments and development partners across the African continent to help build better systems of evidence, production, and use, and she has published peer-reviewed articles, book chapters, and edited books on monitoring and evaluation, and also supervises master's and PhD students. To my left, we have Dami Didier Amani. Didier is the Director for Project Evaluation at the West African Development Bank, or BOAD. BOAD is a regional financial institution dedicated to promoting and financing sustainable development in West Africa. At BOAD, Didier focuses on evaluating regional programs based on efficiency, effectiveness, sustainability, using impact evaluations, and also according to the criterion of leadership. He's involved in several working groups on these topics, both at the West African Monetary Union, or WAIMU, and also the evaluation platform for the regional African development institutions with 3IE and harmonized indicators for private sector operations. DDA has a master's in economics and a postgraduate diploma in statistical analysis from the National Advanced School for Applied Statistics and Economics in Abidjan. Next we have Anca Dumitrescu. Anca has over 15 years of experience working in research and evaluation in low and middle income countries. She leads 3IE's work in West Africa, and in particular the West African Capacity Building and Impact Evaluation Program. This program is a regional initiative focused on working closely with policymakers to improve access and use of evidence for improved public policies in Francophone Africa. The program provides support to government counterparts and regional institutions, helping expand partnerships and strengthen the network of evidence practitioners to increase capacity and improve access to evidence. Anca has a master's degree in political economy from the London School of Economics and Political Science. I hope you'll join me in welcoming our three panelists today. And as I mentioned, we will have three presentations. We'll begin with Anka, then Didier, then Candice. And after each presentation, we'll have time for one or two questions. And at the close of them all, we'll have a panel discussion and then open up discussion to the full session as after that. Okay, so then with that, let's begin with Anka.
Thank you very much. Welcome to Strengthening National Evaluation Systems through Accessible, Actionable, and Relevant Evidence. So I am here to talk a little bit about 3IE, which the International Initiative for Impact Evaluation. And just to give you a brief overview, we are a mission-driven nonprofit organization. We are a global NGO dedicated to using evidence to transform people's lives. We strive to understand what works, for whom, when, and at what cost. We partner with lots of government and development institutions to understand and meet their evidence needs, facilitate the use of existing evidence or generate new evidence, and support their steps in evidence-informed decision-making. We strive to meet policymakers and funders where they are in their evidence needs. So what we mean by that is that we're not just using one evaluation method and we're not just impact evaluation. We try to understand what is the right evidence that they need to make a decision and then adapt to be able to meet that need. We are also committed to learning and exploring the latest methods and technology in our work. We have expanded and have started doing a significant number of evaluation using geospatial as well as remote sensing. We have also begun experimenting with large language models, machine learning, and AI. And my colleague will be presenting a panel on AI tomorrow. For those of you that are interested in the topic, I think you'll find it very interesting. So just as a quick snapshot, we're a fairly small organization. We're less than 100 people. But we do have quite a large number of resources available that are free and accessible on our website. This is actually a very big deal for us because we want to make sure that all the evidence that we have actually gets used. There's no point in producing more evidence if nobody's reading it and if it doesn't serve an actual purpose. So we really want to make sure that we make things as accessible as possible. What I really want to draw your eye to here is the 16,000 studies available for the Development Evidence Portal. And why that's important is because it is the biggest database in the world of rigorous evidence. And if you go to the website, you can filter down by country, by sector, by outcome, by impact, to really get down to the information that you need. And so this portal includes the evidence from the World Bank, from the OECD, from other NGOs, from other studies that are just included on the internet. We curate it, we organize it, and we make it in a way that is easy for you as a practitioner to find what it is that you actually need. We also do something that's a little more unique, which is we try to trace what happens with the products that we produce and the studies that we do. And so we have over 60 plus verified cases of real world impact of the work that we have done, meaning that we do contribution tracing to understand that if the work that we have done, was it taken into account, was it used, was it useful? So there's quite a lot of stakeholder engagement and follow-up to make sure that we provide follow-up after an actual study and useful adaptive evidence. So our portfolio also spans multiple sectors. So it's agriculture, education, governance, nutrition, climate change, also looking at gender-specific and peace building. So really any topic that you can think of, we try to include it in the DEP. So for this, we're talking more about WASI, which is our West Africa Capacity Building and Impact Evaluation Program. WASI is focused on the 8 countries that comprise the West Africa Economic and Monetary Union, and it is a specific Francophone program. It is tailored to work with policymakers, and we try to provide actionable and timely evidence through the WASI Help Desk. We have a local office in Cotonou in Benin, and we work very closely and were established with the support and help of the West Africa Economic and Monetary Union and the West African Development Bank, better known by its French acronym, the BOAD. We have partnerships within each country, and is a program that is supposed to be demand-driven. That means that we reach out to policymakers and others in the region and ask them what it is that they need. What are the pressing issues that they're working on now? We don't have projects of our own that we then try to find a country that is willing to do them. We want to work with what is coming directly from the people we work with. I'd also like to point out that although the program is primarily focused in the 8 countries here, we work a lot with other Francophone countries in the region. It's not just exclusive. And we also try very hard to break out of the little bubbles that we have. So French West Africa versus the Anglophone Africa, we collaborate quite a lot across. We try to keep each other up to date. So there's the Clear Francophone Center in Dakar. We have Clear Anglophone. And so we try to have a more Pan-African view where we tie each other in and not have these sort of siloed regional incentives. So some of the activities that we do is providing actionable and timely information through the help desk, and I'll come back to that with how we do that. We generate capacity and depth for local researchers and policymakers. We support the generation of rigorous and demand-driven evidence and implement evaluations with local teams when requested. The West African region has its own unique environment. It is usually under-resourced and underfunded compared to a lot of the Anglophone countries. So having a program that is focused on meeting these gaps and shortfalls is very important. So in addition to that, most data is in English. So accessibility to have data provided in French is key. But we're not talking just about translating the data from English to French. We're also talking about translating it into something that's easy to understand for the people who need to use it. So from looking at it from complex report, putting it into something that you can actually use that is relevant for your specific environment. We also provide a sustained long-term regional collaborations. We worked very hard to establish a number of key partnerships and keep engaging with those in the region on a regular basis. We meet policymakers where they are in their evidence needs, so we try to provide holistic support. What this means is that it might be a capacity building event. You might want to do just some training on theory of change and logic models. It might be just more generalized, how do you use evidence to set up M&E systems, or it could be a full-fledged impact evaluation using rigorous methodology. And so with that comes a lot of strong local engagement with staff and partners. And so at the government level, but also working with the other local evidence producers in the region. So we have a lot of researchers from the region that we work with. We're not trying to just expand our own program. If there is a need and a collaboration, that we work together as a team. So the stable long-term presence is one of the things that we think is key to building trust. That way, when funding priorities change, when governments change, when policies change, there's a stable presence that you know in the region that you can come back to down the line. So the WASI Help Desk is one of the tools that we've developed to be able to reach policymakers in a fast and reliable and actionable evidence. We try to be a one-stop shop where you can come to us with any question, and we hopefully are able to answer for you or help connect you to somebody who can. So we take targeted policy questions that we solicit from policymakers throughout the region, and we use our synthesis expertise from the wider 3IE to be able to create briefs that are accessible, timely, bilingual, and tailored to decision makers. So what we mean by this is that we don't want to just present what the evidence is. We want to be able to give concrete steps that somebody can take and follow if they so choose. So all the evidence that exists throughout the world, throughout the different databases, it can be extremely difficult to figure out what is useful for you and what you need to do, particularly when there's evidence that is contradictory or extremely complex. So we take it and we put it up. Sorry, that. So we take it and we try to put it within the context of the country and the policymaker that they're talking about. And this way, it is not just tailored for that, but it can provide concrete examples that they can go back to the minister, back to other policymakers, and take decisive steps. So as an example of one of the briefs that we did and how it was used, one of the first one that we did was with the government of Benin. We had a request from a policymaker regarding evidence around technical and vocational training programs. So the government of Benin has started a very large national public policy on to address unemployment rates among educated Beninois youth and helping them need and the need to expand key economic sectors. So they had decided to greatly expand technical and vocational training programs, and they wanted to know how this has gone in other countries. If you're familiar with the sector, the evidence around it has not always been as promising as we would have hoped, but that's not exactly very useful to them. And so it's simply saying, well, the evidence isn't great, doesn't give you anything, and the policy is still in place. So we want to be able to pull out and tease out the lessons learned, the pitfalls, and the things that did work, and which ones can be applicable to what the policy itself as it's written. And so we looked into a number of programs, and we were able to offer some key findings. So for example, one of the issues with TVET programs that we found in a couple similar countries have been that the local businesses and the private sector was not engaged in designing the technical programs. And so it often happened that the vocational trainings were on skills that were not in high demand by the people who were supposed to then employ them. And so a key recommendation is to include the private sector and have discussions and see what they offer to make sure that you're addressing actually the needs of the skills. Some other ones were regarding, for example, accreditation. We found that businesses a lot of times didn't really understand how well the technical level that was done through vocational programs, so they didn't know, well, I'm not sure how qualified this person is or not. And so we talked about potentially offering some type of accreditation and other such steps. And so all of these are things that can take a policy that, even if the evidence around the programs was not initially as successful, give you concrete steps that you can do to ensure that your program is stronger and possibly have the success that you're looking for. So this type of brief was shared with high-level ministers who were in charge of the planning, and directive was given to ensure that the recommendations get taken into account and implemented as they were unveiling the implementation of the program. We'll have another example down the line, but other things that we do is really focusing on moving from theory into practice. So the monitoring and evaluation landscape in West Africa has really evolved a lot over the years, and I would say this globally around the world. There's a lot more people who have championed evaluations and who have become evaluators and have really good technical skills. But sometimes we find that there's still a gap between the theory and the evaluation and the actual practice of doing of the things, putting it while you're in the field. And so that is one of the gaps that we help also fill, is working into thinking about, okay, how do you actually put this into action? And that's something that we work a lot with local partners, and it's a mutual relationship, because we get a lot of the information that we need from them about the local context, about what you could or couldn't do, and we can provide some of the experience that we've had simply through years of having done it longer, in putting it together. And so that is one of the ways that we're doing it with them. We also tailor to the audience. So when you're talking to decision makers and we're engaging with them, it's a different conversation than when we're talking to practitioners, because obviously they are not as interested in statistical power and some of the more data-driven conversations. So when we're working with the researchers and you're having a high-level technical conversation, the conversation then switches when we're talking, of course, with policymakers who need a different type of evidence. So, of course, then, we're getting to do that. Over there. So we also have capacity building trainings. So from high level to basic M&E, and also on new methodologies nowadays like geospatial and artificial intelligence. And one of the things that's really important for us here is to make sure that all our staff, including our local staff in West Africa and our partners, have the opportunities to participate in these trainings. We don't want this to be just something that we're doing in our Washington office or our Delhi office, but we want them to have the skills to do it themselves. And so we've worked on a number of trainings that are now being translated into French, so then the researchers from BOAD and others can also take these and do them themselves. All of this, of course, is public goods and available because we want people to use them. So I spoke a little bit about how we're stronger together. And so we really want to make sure that we collaborate across with the different partners in West Africa and the rest of Africa to build in on each one of our capacities and really fill in the gaps. And there's a lot of things that we're missing that they provide, and there's some things that we provide, of course. And we do also a number of convenings and different workshops where we share knowledge and resources, and where we also invite policymakers to engage with them and try to make sure that they're aware of what we can offer, but also keep us relevant, because we want to really understand what are the needs that come from them. So we have our local cadre of qualified staff. We have everywhere from research assistants to senior evaluation specialists, and they're supported by the wider 3IE. And this is very helpful because it gives us people on the ground who can quickly meet with somebody on the last minute notice, but they're engaged with the global network that 3IE offers. So they still have access to the international conferences and meeting with other specialists from different regions and being able to benefit from the more global network. And we strive to provide a stable and dependable presence in the region. So trying to make sure that we're not just a program that's set there for a small amount of time that's going to go away. We want to be sustainable. We want to be able to adapt to political changes and help the next level of policymakers that come through. So that's my presentation. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Anka. I have a question of my own, but I'd also invite our colleagues in the room if they have one or two questions before we go to the next speaker. So I'll ask my question and then take one or two from the audience as well. Anka, I was very interested listening to your presentation and thinking back to a conversation at the African Evidence Network's gathering in Entebbe, where we were together last October, a number of us. And one of the themes that came up at that time was ensuring that there was, as the ecosystem gets built in sub-Saharan Africa around evidence use, was ensuring that there was a really purposeful inclusion of Francophone Africa in that conversation, that it didn't become an Anglophone conversation, or it didn't become driven by countries where English is the primary language. And you talked about some of the different things that WASI does in West Africa. And I was wondering, I wanted to make sure I caught this correctly, if you could highlight the extent to which those are in French or bilingual. So that's my first question. Then my second question was about the help desk that you talked about. And I was curious about where those questions come from, those are questions from government, I gather. And then I was also thinking about language in that context. And if you're taking an international literature then and trying to synthesize it down and provide in French, and if that's part of the approach.
Yes, so the program is Francophone. Most of the things that we do are in French. We, of course, put briefs in English and French because we want to make them accessible past just the West Africa region. We don't want to go the other way where we just have French available and not English. We want to put it in both. So we want to serve the wider network, but the program itself is primarily in French. The questions that are solicited are from policymakers that we work with, and so we do outreach every once in a while, and sometimes it can be every few weeks, depending how often we speak with them, but at least once a year we do an outreach to everyone, and then every few weeks or so we'll have specific outreach to those that are interested, and just solicit questions. A lot of questions come from when we have workshops. So we recently had a workshop with parliamentarians in Benin, and they had a number of questions come from the policymakers that attended those workshops. And so in terms of translation, it's, yeah, we take it all in and put it into English and French.
Great, thank you. So I saw two hands, now three. Maybe start in the back with the white jacket, and then here in front, and then third Manny all the way in the back.
Thank you. With the white jacket, this is Nea-Mari Heinonen from the MFA Finland. I realize my question might sound a bit odd, but I'll ask it anyway. We talk about accessible, actionable, and relevant evidence. According to your experience and insights, what type of evidence does get accepted or utilized the most by the policymakers? If you have any insights on that, and I don't have an agenda hidden in that question, but just simply interested in the kind of facilitating factors, since we are talking about accessible, actionable, and relevant evidence. Do you have any experiences of the types of evidence that are currently really the more effective ones? Thank you.
Anka, let me take a couple of questions, and then if you could field them at once. Yes, sir, here in front. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'm Kazim from Planning Commission, Government of Pakistan. It was very interesting and learning time during the presentation. I think what I learned from your presentation, you are actually supporting those actors during the whole process of the evaluation in their capacity building and also getting the results from the evaluation. One thing you actually mentioned, the evidence not always the positive. That means the process was not positively delivered, or the findings of those evaluations were not actually the positive. Another thing is, I'm more interested actually, how much those findings, the lesson learned actually integrated into the future, their plans, whether you actually just delivered the evaluations or you were actually better actually supported, facilitated during the integration of those findings into their policies. What was the strategy actually? How much you were actually successful in integrating those findings? Thank you.
Okay, Anka, that's a lot. So maybe start with these two, and then we'll continue with a couple more, and then move to Didier.
Okay, I'll keep them short. So for your question, what kind of evidence is accessible and actionable? So I think it's one that takes into account the realities of what the policymakers are doing and need to be doing. So in the context of what I presented with TVET, whether the evidence is positive or not, they are doing this policy. And so the evidence that they need is how to make it stronger and improve it. So saying like, well, there's a bunch of programs that are out there and they didn't have the results that they were promised is not helpful to anybody. And so the evidence that we then provide are, here are some of the things that seem to be promising. Here are some steps that you can take. And I like to emphasize that we don't tell people what to do. We present the options. It's not our job we influence them to the extent that they want us to influence them. We're not trying to say, you have to do this or you have to do that. So evidence that they can use, that they can implement in what they're doing is really the key to it. The question that you're talking about here, when the evidence is not always positive, we focus on the results. So a lot of the briefs are based on impact evaluations. So where you're doing a rigorous method, either RCTs or quasi-experimental, and so there's an expected impact that should be coming out of that is measurable with a counterfactual. They're not the only ones we do. We expand past that to be as inclusive as possible, especially when we're trying to contextualize to a specific country where there wouldn't be as much impact evaluations. But you're talking about it in terms of the result of the program itself. And yes, we do follow to see what happens afterwards. So we have a lot of conversations and back and forth with the policymakers to make sure that what we present is actually useful to them. And sometimes we have had feedbacks like, great, well, that's not really helping me at this moment. That's not really what I wanted to hear. And so we go back and forth, and then we try to see, okay, well, what is additional information we can provide? What would be more helpful to you? And so sometimes that takes several reiterations before a brief is actually finalized. And so we do try to follow up afterwards. We don't want to leave people in a vacuum, whether it's a capacity building training or a program. We follow up and like, hey, is there anything more that you need? What happened with this? Are there next steps that you want to do? And that will be more relevant in the next presentation.
Okay, maybe we'll take 2 more questions and then we'll move to the next presentation. So let's go with Manny and then Sir Vu, ici. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Anka. My name is Manny Jimenez from the Asian Development Bank. And having been seen WASI when it was starting, it's really great to see how much it's progressed. So congratulations to 3IE and the team for taking it forward. My question is about the help desk, and how long does it take? What are the mechanics of answering the questions? Do you have an army of RAs answering them, or are you moving towards AI? Because if I look at the questions that were being asked, they sound like the kind of questions I might pose to a chat GPT or something like that. Maybe you'll answer that tomorrow, but I can't go tomorrow, so I wondered what the story was. Thanks.
Merci. Je m'appelle Youssouf Ndia, je suis de la Côte d'Ivoire. Vous l'avez dit, votre programme appuie les pays de l'UEMOA, qui est l'Union économique et monétaire ouest-africaine. C'est vrai qu'on se rend compte des appuis que vous nous apportez. Vous l'avez dit, il y a plus de 16 000 études qui sont disponibles. Mais une de nos difficultés, c'est vraiment la barrière linguistique. Parce qu'effectivement, dans nos pays, je dirais, ouest-africains, c'est maintenant que nous sommes vraiment en train de mettre en place les éléments pour faire de bonnes évaluations. Les évaluations qui étaient faites, généralement, étaient faites en collaboration avec les partenaires. Or, désormais, nous, par exemple, le cas de la Côte d'Ivoire, nous avons une loi qui enjoint que toutes les politiques publiques, désormais, doivent être évaluées. Et donc, la loi fait obligation à ce que quand on met en une politique publique, cette politique publique-là doit être évaluée. Ça veut dire qu'on a vraiment besoin de partage de connaissances. Malheureusement, les études que vous avez, pour la plupart du temps, c'est des études qui sont en anglais. Donc, ça constitue un peu un frein au partage de connaissances à notre niveau. Donc, c'est bien que vous l'avez peut-être mentionné, mais il faut le faire un peu plus c'est vraiment de mettre à disposition des études en français qui nous permettraient véritablement d'être suffisamment outillés dans le cadre de l'évaluation que nous allons mener dans nos différents pays. Voilà, merci.
Okay. Anka, maybe before answering the second question, you could also summarize it quickly in English. Not everybody had translation.
So, Manny, to your question, no, we don't have an army of RAs, unfortunately, but we do have the DEP, which has gone through a lot of curated and work, and the synthesis that's on there is very, very good. There's a number of systematic reviews that boil down large amounts of information into something concise that can be easily used. We do work with a number of RAs, of course, to get the information into a brief and usable. We do not put it in ChatGPT. I'm sure it would give me an answer, and probably a lot of times might be somewhat correct. But part of we want to make sure the contextualized aspect is there, and that you're not going to get at this point in time yet. Also, we are very careful about what we include, because we want to make sure that the evidence that we include has been assessed and that you can trust it. And I think that's really important, because I see a lot of people out there talking about rapid evidence and assessments and things. And a lot of times it's more of a literature review. It's something you're quickly looking across a bunch of studies and writing it out. That's not the same thing. We really try to be as extensive as possible. The DEP itself tries to is continuously updated. We're constantly looking at studies and putting them in there. And it's studies in lots of different languages, not just in English, that we include, although the data and the reports are generally in English. And so I think that's really important, because the trust element is key in the data that we provide. We note in the brief which studies we looked at, why some were included and why some may not have been. We also note that our level of confidence in the studies that were done. Sometimes it's a very good study and you have a high level of confidence. Sometimes you're not quite sure that the results are what the authors are presenting. And so we try to be very honest about that. In terms of duration, it depends on how complex the brief is and how many back and forth that we need to have. But usually we strive to have it within about 6 weeks or so. Sometimes it can be quicker if it's an easy topic that has a lot of information. It's a lot harder if it's something that we really have to go dig into. And then for the last question from Côte d'Ivoire was regarding most of the evidence in our portal. We have 16,000 studies. They're in English. Few of them are relevant, specific, or included directly from Côte d'Ivoire because they don't have as big a body of evidence. But there is a law right now creating it an obligation to evaluate programs. And so a lot of ministries have these requirements of evaluation, but difficulty in actually implementing it. So there's different levels of capacity or training in the methods that you need to be using, but also in actual doing of the studies. Alors, pour répondre à votre requête, on a travaillé avec vous depuis le début de Voici, donc on est content de continuer ça dans le cadre des formations, mais aussi à l'appui de mettre en place les évaluations eux-mêmes. On travaille pour mettre plus de choses en français. C'est un processus, mais on avance. Et je pense que de là où on était il y a 6 ans, quand on a commencé avec le programme, jusqu'à maintenant, il y a une telle grande différence dans le nombre de personnes qui sont bien formées, notre capacité à tout le monde de connaître bien l'évaluation et ce qu'on peut faire ensemble. Et plutôt, on a commencé de mettre en place avec les gouvernements les propres évaluations. Donc, on travaille avec les équipes de le début, de le design jusqu'à la fin pour les appuyer à faire tout ça ensemble.
In the spirit of our conversation at the African Evidence Network last October, I think we're going to proceed in French now, yeah? Okay.
Eh bien, permettez-moi de me lever pour ne pas avoir à tourner trop la tête. Donc, j'ai le plaisir de vous présenter quelque chose qui est un peu rare lorsqu'on fait les réunions en évaluation. C'est de parler dans la chaîne, il y a un maillon qui manque, c'est le maillon régional. Donc, je vais prendre un cas précis pour vous montrer comment, à partir de la région, nous arrivons à utiliser les évaluations pour permettre aux décideurs de décider sur des éléments bien concrets. Donc, ma présentation va se faire en 5 grands points. Dans un premier temps, je vais vous présenter la zone d'intérêt pour que vous voyez de quoi il s'agit. Ensuite, je vais vous prendre un programme qui continue toujours dans la zone, qui est l'initiative régionale de l'énergie durable. Et nous allons voir dans cette initiative le programme d'urgence qui a fait l'objet d'une évaluation. Nous allons vous présenter la question d'évaluation, la méthodologie et les leçons apprises, vraiment de façon résumée. Mais nous allons mettre l'accent sur les recommandations majeures, ou la recommandation majeure, et comment nous sommes dans le processus de mise en place de cette recommandation. Et bien entendu, nous allons essayer de voir les perspectives et qui vont permettre d'échanger par la suite. Donc, la zone, c'est l'Afrique de l'Ouest, donc les pays ont déjà été montrés. Mais ce qui est très important, c'est cette architecture. Au niveau des États, c'est totalement différent, mais au niveau régional, ça va commencer par le Conseil des chefs d'État. Dans notre zone, nous en avons 8. Normalement, c'est 8 pays francophones, mais il y a un pays lusophone. Ensuite, vous avez le Conseil des ministres, qui est le Conseil des ministres des Affaires économiques. Et en dessous, vous avez 3 institutions majeures. Il y a de l'autre côté la commission de l'UEMOA qui va élaborer les politiques. Donc, c'est la partie exécutive. Vous avez de l'autre côté la Banque centrale qui gère la monnaie. Et vous avez au milieu la Banque ouest-africaine de développement qui, en fait, a pour actionnaire majoritaire la Banque centrale et les 8 États membres de l'Union. Mais nous avons aussi parmi les actionnaires les non-régionaux, tels que la Chine, la France, l'Inde, la Belgique, l'Angleterre, plutôt l'Allemagne. Et en dessous, vous avez les conseils des ministres sectoriels et vous avez un conseil spécifique qu'on appelle le Conseil national de politique économique. Donc voilà l'architecture dans laquelle nous naviguons au niveau régional. Si vous regardez en Afrique de l'Est, en Afrique centrale, c'est pratiquement la même organisation, à quelques variables près. Donc, le problème qui s'est posé en 2008, c'est que nous avons une très grande crise énergétique dans la zone. Et à partir de cette crise, l'idée était d'augmenter la production énergétique. Et donc, il fallait financer un programme sur 4 ans qui allait aller de 2009 à 2012. Et les fonds étaient à peu près à 700 millions de dollars. Donc, ces fonds étaient levés sur la place régionale. Donc, la Banque centrale et le marché régional a permis de lever les ressources. Donc, pour que le système fonctionne, le programme fonctionne, il y a 4 structures qui ont été créées. Donc, vous avez au départ la structure stratégique au haut niveau. Donc, vous reverrez tout ce que j'ai présenté tout à l'heure. Mais en dessous, vous avez une structure technique qui va suivre le programme au niveau régional. Bien entendu, la BOAD, en tant que banque de financement des infrastructures, va mettre en place les financements et suivre les projets. La commission de l'UEMOA va porter la gestion ou bien la surveillance du programme. Et bien entendu, les comités nationaux vont exécuter au niveau national. Donc, qu'est-ce qui se passe dans cette configuration? Vous voyez qu'il y a plusieurs acteurs qui sont imbriqués. Et donc, lorsque vous allez devoir travailler sur l'évaluation, il va falloir les impliquer ensemble. Et dans cet exercice, lorsque nous le faisons à l'époque, 3IE nous a accompagnés à un moment donné et pour pouvoir travailler sur les évaluations à conduire. Donc, qu'est-ce que nous avons eu comme résultat de ces évaluations que nous avons conduites en 2022? Si vous voyez, ça va faire plus de 10 ans après le démarrage du programme d'urgence. Donc, le programme est ressorti comme pertinent. Nous nous sommes rendus compte qu'il y a eu un grand retard dans le programme. le taux de succès est 63%, donc 2/3. Nous ne sommes pas allés vers l'énergie renouvelable de prime abord parce qu'il y avait une urgence. Donc nous sommes allés vers l'énergie carbonée. Donc c'est quelque chose sur lequel nous devons évoluer. Et également au niveau des acteurs, nous avons constaté qu'il y avait une faiblesse dans le suivi de tels programmes. Le programme comportait 17 projets dans 8 pays. Donc pouvoir avoir un regard de mise en œuvre était très complexe. Donc, qu'est-ce que nous avons décidé comme recommandation, qui est une recommandation actionnable? Ce qui est ressorti, c'est que les chefs d'État ont dit ils ont mentionné au niveau de la BOAD que le programme a été implémenté, mais ils n'ont pas une vue. Pendant la mise en œuvre, ils n'avaient pas une vue synthétique de la mise en œuvre du programme. Donc, il fallait mettre en place un système d'information qui pouvait être partagé en temps quasi réel pour que chacun sache ce qui est en train de se passer sur le terrain. C'est le terme exact. Que nous puissions savoir ce qui est en train de se passer sur le terrain sans avoir à vous interroger. Donc, cette question, c'était qu'il fallait avoir un système de suivi et évaluation totalement différent de ce que nous avons. C'est-à-dire un système digitalisé avec l'analyse géospatiale, mais également, il fallait mettre en place une loi qui va pouvoir encadrer toute cette fonction. Et donc, c'est dans cette dynamique que nous avons démarré les échanges depuis 2 ans. Et les grands défis que nous avons, c'est pouvoir échanger entre tous ces acteurs qui ont des perceptions différentes, qui ont des attentes différentes. Et l'autre élément, c'est la complexité du processus. Vous avez vu qu'il y a plusieurs acteurs. Donc, généralement, nous avons un processus en 5 niveaux qui peut prendre de 2 à 5 ans en moyenne. Et qu'est-ce que nous sommes en train de faire actuellement? C'est que nous sommes pratiquement au premier niveau où nous avons fini d'échanger avec les acteurs. Mais lorsque vous finissez d'échanger avec les acteurs, il y a ce qu'on appelle la phase de pré-pilotage. C'est-à-dire tout ce que vous avez fait comme recommandation, il va falloir aller à très petite échelle pour pouvoir mettre en œuvre. C'est ce qui a permis aujourd'hui de mettre en place un système digitalisé de suivi et évaluation à distance. Mais c'est ce qui a permis également de commencer à travailler sur les tests de loi de la directive régionale. Et ces tests de loi sont faits avec les 8 États membres, plus les 3 institutions que j'ai présentées. Mais quant au système de suivi et évaluation digitalisé avec l'analyse géospatiale, c'est porté par la BOAD qui a fait un exercice pilote qui va être présenté en décembre. Donc, cette première phase va se terminer d'ici la fin de l'année et ça va nous permettre de passer à la deuxième phase qui sera une phase où chaque pays, chaque ministère technique, et on a aussi le cas de la Côte d'Ivoire, on a le Bénin, vont être appelés à travailler ensemble pour que les directives puissent prendre forme et voir comment les contextes nationaux sont pris en compte au niveau régional. Donc voilà un peu, je dirais, les contraintes et les perspectives que j'ai voulu présenter pour pouvoir mettre un contexte pour les discussions. Merci.
Okay, I'd like to start with one question of my own and then invite our participants here to ask questions as well. I'm fascinated by this framework, Didier. It's a real shift in thinking for me away from thinking about either national evaluation systems at the country level or thinking about how donors fit in. The notion of a supranational system is something I haven't thought about before. And you laid out towards the end some of the challenges. So now I'm going to ask you a very unfair question. Okay. Are you optimistic about realizing this system in order to be able to achieve all the things that you talked about would come from such a system, given the challenges of a supranational system?
Donc, je vais continuer. En fait, nous sommes très optimistes. Parce que ce système que j'ai montré fonctionne depuis 1994. Et la Commission, la BOAD, les États, nous avons généré plus d'une centaine de directives. Et la dernière directive qui a été mise en place après 5 années de travaux, c'est la directive sur les programmes, les budgets orientés sur les programmes pays. Donc, pour nous, le système est très huilé. Les personnes, les structures se connaissent. il y a des cadres de concertation permanents, il y a des cadres de concertation trimestriels, semestriels et annuels. Donc, tout ce qu'il faut maintenant, c'est que les institutions puissent les porter. Et parmi les institutions qui portent la question de l'évaluation au niveau de l'UEMOA, au niveau régional, c'est la Banque ouest-africaine de développement. Et notre expérience à côté de la commission de l'UEMOA, des États et de la Banque centrale, également avec d'autres acteurs extérieurs, donc j'ai parlé de 3IE, mais on a travaillé également avec CLIE, Afrique francophone et Afrique lusophone, mais on a également un très grand partenariat avec la Banque mondiale, avec qui nous travaillons depuis longtemps. Donc le contexte, nous le maîtrisons, et quand nous vous disons c'est de 2 à 5 ans, nous savons que en 5 ans au maximum, ça peut se faire. Et c'est sur ça que nous sommes en train de travailler maintenant. Les hommes sont là, la volonté est là, et le besoin est là parce que je vous ai dit que c'est un besoin qui vient des chefs d'État. Il vous dit, par exemple, je finance un programme de 700 milliards. Je veux savoir qu'est-ce qui se passe sur le terrain parce que les populations se plaignent. Donc, je pense qu'il y a de l'optimisme. Nous voulons y travailler. Merci.
Okay, do we have some questions for Didier then? Yes, sir.
Merci pour cette présentation. Je voudrais, par rapport à la directive sur l'évaluation, parce qu'effectivement, comme vous l'avez dit, nous sommes dans l'Union économique et monétaire. On a un certain nombre de directives, notamment en matière de budget programme, donc qui fonctionnent, je dirais, normalement dans les 8 pays. Comme je le disais tout à l'heure, la Côte d'Ivoire a, par exemple, une loi sur l'évaluation. Et pour nous, il est vraiment important qu'on ait cette directive au niveau de notre union qui nous permettrait justement de pouvoir, puisque les directives sont supranationales, elles s'imposent aux différents pays. Donc il est important pour nous, effectivement, de disposer de cette directive qui nous permettrait vraiment de pouvoir, je dirais, systématiser l'évaluation dans nos différents projets et programmes. Alors, vous en avez parlé, c'est peut-être de savoir un peu où on en est avec cette directive et surtout, comme vous l'avez dit, vous êtes très optimiste pour la réalisation de cette directive et quand est-ce qu'on peut espérer mettre en place cette directive qui nous permettrait véritablement, qui permettrait à nos pays vraiment de systématiser l'évaluation. Voilà un peu ma question. Merci.
Ok. Ben, merci. Je pense que je vais prendre le pari pour dire 2028 parce que les travaux ont été déjà faits sur le calendrier avec les différents acteurs. Le budget a été mobilisé. Donc, sur ça, je pense qu'à horizon 2028, la directive sera faite au niveau de l'Union. Maintenant, où en sommes-nous? Comme je l'ai dit, au niveau des directives, nous commençons toujours par un exposé de motifs qui est introduit à un comité technique qu'on appelle le Comité national de politique économique, qui comprend les 8 États membres, donc les ministères de l'économie. Nous avons la Banque centrale, la BOAD, la Commission de l'UEMOA et le régulateur du marché financier. Donc cette réunion, comme nous avons déjà les éléments, l'année d'ici décembre, nous allons le soumettre. Donc ça suppose que au premier trimestre de l'année prochaine, il y aura cette réunion qui va pouvoir permettre d'aller à la deuxième étape. Donc à la deuxième étape, comme vous le savez, donc ça sera plus le ministère de l'économie, le comité national, mais ça sera bien entendu vous, donc les ministères du plan, qui sont les ministères techniques, qui vont avoir à se plancher sur l'avant-projet pour pouvoir donner leurs inputs. Et les discussions vont se poursuivre jusqu'à ce que les ministres se réunissent. Donc, quand nous regardons au niveau régional, cela va nous mettre entre 1 an et 1 an et demi. Et suite à cela, on a la réunion des experts, donc, qui va regrouper encore les institutions plus les États pour affiner la partie juridique du document. Et après, l'avant-dernière étape, c'est le secrétariat conjoint du Conseil des ministres qui va mettre en forme le document, faire tout ce qu'il y a comme synthèse et transmettre le document officiel à la commission de l'UEMOA qui est habilitée à présenter cela au Conseil des ministres. Donc, tout ce processus va se faire autour de 3 à 2 ans. Donc, plus les 1 an et demi que je viens d'ajouter, vous voyez qu'on est à peu près à 4 ans et demi. Donc, voilà, c'est comme ça que nous avons fait les autres directives et ça sera la même manière. Merci.
Thank you. Okay, any other questions for Didier before we move to the presentation by Candice from Clear AA? Candice?
We go. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to be talking to you about Clear AA's country program, what we call a country program. It's basically our strategy to strengthen national evaluation systems. Next slide, please, or do I have a pointer? Oh, do I? Okay. Thanks. So we do have 6 clear centers globally. So we have, the Anglophone African Center, of course, services English-speaking African countries. I think Didier did talk to the Clear Francophone Africa Center, if I was listening well, which is based in Dakar in Senegal. And then we have other centers in other regions of the world as well. So I'm spotlighting Clear Anglophone Africa, but a number of the other centers do very similar work as well. So just a little bit about what the Clear centers are and what they do before we dive right into the strengthening of national evaluation systems. We are a global evaluation capacity development initiative launched way back in 2010 already. It was initially an initiative driven by the World Bank. Our hub, or our center, was based in Washington, D.C. But if you've heard well, we now have the Global Evaluation Initiative, which is based in Brussels. So we've changed the structure of the hub and the Clear centers over the years. And so this has happened since 2020. The reason why that changed is because there was a consensus amongst partners in development cooperation that there was a lack of coherence in evaluation capacity development in general. And the thinking was that the Global Evaluation Initiative, together with its implementing partners, would begin to bring some coherence in capacity development. I think one of the big challenges is that with the incoherence is that you then don't find a systematic, progressive pathway of professional development for evaluation professionals over time. And I think this was one of the big challenges for development cooperation partners, for example, where they would like, for example, more locally owned national evaluation systems, or in their own decentralized or joint evaluations would like to include local evaluators, but there wasn't a sense that they could access or that there were sufficient numbers of evaluators locally. So that's just one of the sorts of challenges that we're trying to address with the GEI and the Clear centers that are implementing partners to them. Our particular center is hosted by Wits University, or the University of the Witwatersrand. That is in Johannesburg, South Africa, so that has been since inception. So Wits University is one of the top universities on the African continent, and you'll find that most of the other Clear centers are also hosted or housed within academic institutions as well. So that has given us a lot of leverage on the continent, for example. A lot of individuals know the legitimacy and the gravitas of the Wits brand, for example, and we've been able to really establish the Clear AA brand together with the Wits brand as well. And I think other Clear centers find a similar kind of legitimacy in the space, because the other challenge, I think, with individuals seeking training or capacity development, or institutions also looking for partners, they want to ensure that those partners have the kind of quality curriculum and quality training that they can depend on, and being housed or jointly having collaborations with strong academic institutions has given us that kind of legitimacy in the space as well. The mission is to strengthen M&E systems, and here we talk about, I know we've been talking about evaluation all the time, but on the African continent we really talk about monitoring and evaluation, because there is a deep chasm, or still a big need and a demand to improve monitoring systems, so that the data that is required for decision making from monitoring data, from your more consistent, regular statistical data or data about program implementation, or government administrative data, there are huge weaknesses across the continent, and there is still a huge need to strengthen monitoring systems as well as evaluation systems. So we talk about strengthening monitoring and evaluation systems, even though for shorthand we might say strengthening national evaluation systems, but embedded in that is the monitoring aspect as well. And we often find that when we start working with a country, one of the big demands is, can you help us with our data systems or monitoring systems? So we'll get to some of those questions later. And then, of course, the capacity to use evidence. So we work on both the supply and demand side, the production of evidence, strengthening those capacities, but also strengthening the capacities of decision makers to actually use that information and use that evidence. So we've worked with parliaments in the past, and still continue to do so, depending on the appetite and the opportunity to do so. And our focus is on system-wide impact, on institution building and on individual capacity development. So just in terms of the framing of our work, what do we believe in? What do we say? What does success look like? What do we do in order to achieve that success? So we believe that if you have strengthened capacity for monitoring and evaluation, then you will have better use of evidence to improve programs and support decision making, and ultimately we will have better governance and improved development outcomes in Africa. Now, there are massive hidden assumptions within those leaps. That is why I'm not using the term theory of change very intentionally here, because there's a lot of missing in this picture. But we are ambitious, and we have the conviction that better systems for evidence production and use can lead to better outcomes. We are continuously striving to tell the story. It's difficult because measuring these things are social constructs, and measuring how change happens and what kind of changes we're looking for, because the complexity of the massive institutions we work in and work with, it takes some time to write up these stories. So we have impact stories that we're constantly working on in order to tell the story. But certainly it's a long game. It's not, very often our funders will ask us for stories of change after a year or two, and it's very, very difficult because institution building is a long game. So this is our country program approach in a very simplistic manner. For functional reasons, of course, we've had to separate ourselves into different functions. And so we have something called evaluation systems. We call them business lines, but that's just a label to say that this is a team that works with evaluation systems. We also have a team working on capacity strengthening, which is really the curriculum development, the training, the individual capacity building on an individual level. And then we have a research and learning component, and a team who specifically works on the iteration of us learning from our work and then feeding our learning back into our work. And the diagram on the right with the circles, that seems very simple, but that took us a couple of years to get to that point. So in the first 5 years of the CLEAR Centre's existence, I would say that it mostly did training. When the CLEAR Centres were first established by the World Bank and by the Multi-Donor Trust Fund, a lot of the initial working was developing short course materials and doing a lot of training. But over time, we realized that something was missing. That as we worked with partners, they would ask us, what now, what next? We have this problem, can you help us with that? And we weren't really positioned at the time to address that. And we needed to then go back to the drawing board, looking at our model of working and saying it can't just be about training. So over time, we then developed a model that says, okay, we have to first understand what the problem is. So we call it diagnostics. I know diagnostics is a very machine-oriented word. We call them systems analyses really now, but diagnostics is easy for everybody to sort of shorthand understand. But when we are asked to work with a country, to partner with a country, and like Anka said, it's very demand-driven. We first need to understand the landscape, and we need to understand what the need is. Why is the apparent manifested need seem to be training? Is there something deeper going on? And very often through that diagnostic, we do find that, okay, there might be a capacity, individual capacities in sort of building the capacities of the state and sometimes non-state actors as well. A need for a deeper capacity needs assessment. But then we normally will have some kind of strategy or country program document that guides us in terms of what's needed. So whether it's evaluation capacity building, which is also much broader than just the individual training, but it's also about mentorship, about relationship building, and I'll get to that in a minute. Coupled with technical assistance, that normally is structured into a program that is jointly agreed upon together with the counterparts in the country we're working with, and we will work then together on that particular program. Our research and learning then draws from our work, and we ask questions when we're starting interventions. What kind of learning, what do we want to learn from this? Or alternatively, some of those questions for learning are sort of, at a higher level across the entire organization. We'll have questions around what kind of changes are our training programs bringing about, and we might do tracer studies and so forth. So we really do try to ensure that we don't just publish academically, because an important point of being hosted by a research-intensive university and a top university on the continent is that there is a lot of pressure to publish academically. And the danger of that is then to focus on questions that are unrelated to the work. So we've worked very hard to ensure that there's this, a virtuous cycle of learning from our work, so that even though we do publish and we meet the requirements of our host institution, at the same time it really is valuable and meaningful to our work as well. So again, just in summary of how the country, or maybe in a little bit more detail of how the country program actually works when we're starting to work in a country, what happens? We will conduct a monitoring and evaluation systems analysis on the state of M&E in a country. For those of you who are familiar with the 10 steps to designing a monitoring and evaluation system, the old book from the World Bank, it's basically a readiness assessment, but a much more sophisticated one that's quite detailed and in-depth. And our approach there is co-production. So we normally do this with government counterparts, with the public officials, so that we have an insider understanding of what those needs are. Somebody mentioned nothing about us without, I think it was Isabel this morning in the panel, and that is indeed our approach, that we agree with our country partners on the key areas that require strengthening, that is in terms of capacities, systems, and then we will then implement or develop an M&E and systems strengthening strategy with earmarked projects and key intervention areas. The preference here, and I think this is what I want to highlight about that third point, is that our preference is to collaborate with other partners. So we've collaborated with 3IE, for example, in Zambia on when there was a need for their revision of their postgrad diploma in M&E with a focus on impact evaluation. And we knew that, okay, we are not the experts in impact evaluation, but we knew 3IE are. So we approached them and we worked together, for example, in Zambia, and we built those synergies. So that is what we try to do, because invariably there's always a partner doing something in that space. So we try as far as possible in our interventions to build that coherence amongst partners working in a particular country. And then we also try to ensure that we use the model of co-production wherever feasible. So I see our colleague Timothy Lubanga from Uganda sitting here. He will very well know that for the revision of the national evaluation policy, or the development of the policy, there was co-production with officials from 20 ministries, departments and agencies based on the 20 key priority areas of Uganda in a co-production approach, so that the policy is not something that is done by us and then given to the government of Uganda, but it's something that is developed with an intrinsic internal eye on what is needed in that policy. So that's a very important part of our approach as well. And then I did talk about the research and learning. Thomas, I know I'm almost through. I've got 1 minute left. Will you allow me to run through all my slides? Do we have some time? It's fine? Okay. We're okay. So these are our countries. I won't spend too much time on this, but just to explain that, you know, it really is difficult to talk about country programs when it is demand-driven, or let's say to talk about a defined list of country programs when it is demand-driven, because it really does depend on whether the country wants us to be there or not. So we have this list. It's always a moving target. And wherever we are invited, we ensure that we, of course, have a program that is strategic and sustainable over time. But things do change. There are political shifts that happen, administrative shifts, people moving to different positions, or there's no longer a demand, or the demand is in abeyance for a while. So we have to operate with agility in this space. But in general, we have, quite a large, I think, list of countries, but our core countries for now are Tanzania, Uganda, Lesotho, and Malawi. In terms of emergent and ad hoc countries, those can sort of move very quickly into core countries as soon as there is, for example, resources available to do more work and so forth. But I thought it was just interesting to show you that the spread, and I was, when you said you're a small team, Anka, of 100 people, our team at the moment, we're 14 people. So you can see why we need to operate on the basis of co-production and partnerships, because a small team of 14 people would not be able to do significant work in areas like this. So it's important to note that partnerships are core and really key to the work that we do. Okay, so just some considerations for building valuable, sustained, long-term collaborations. We begin with a relationship, not a program. I think it's really, really important. It's an important aspect because we're not a consulting agency. We don't go in and say, well, this is what we have to sell to you. We start with a conversation and a series of conversations until we emerge with and we unearth what that particular need is. We conduct a proper assessment of the M&E landscape. It's not a quick process. It is quite in-depth. We spend quite a bit of time with a particular tool. The tool is called the MISA, the Monitoring and Evaluation Systems Analysis. It's quite an extensive tool, but we also agree with our country counterparts which parts of the tool are most applicable for their particular situation. I think some important points here is that the MISA allows for relevance in selection and prioritization of interventions and makes room for tailoring or customization to local contexts. We spoke about that quite a bit this morning in the plenary panel, and it's really important about customization. We don't have off-the-shelf solutions that we provide. We really do customize everything according to what that country needs. It obviously facilitates buy-in, that is from policymakers and from citizens or recipients of interventions. It facilitates a more focused and appropriate stakeholder engagement, and it facilitates relationship building with champions. And that's really important. One needs to have, a champion who's actually leading the establishment and the growth of that national evaluation system internal to the system. And we found that those champions are incredibly important. In fact, so important that sometimes the sustainability of especially if it's at a fragile sort of entry point to the system being established, if that champion somehow is placed in another position in government, that's one of the risks, in fact, and one of the challenges of this, that then it's like a house of cards. It just, falls away, and one has to wait until a new champion is identified to take that forward. But once the institution has, got some foundations and it's grounded, then obviously it's much more sustainable. Let me go to the next one, because I'm sure that with questions I can answer some of those issues. Some challenges, I think balancing responsiveness in the context of constraints and opportunities. So I'm not sure how pervasive this is for other organizations like 3IE working in this space, but resource constraints are really affecting us. So when there are demands, and you looked at sort of the map, and the demands are coming from all angles. And our team obviously is very small. So to be constrained, with those kinds of resource constraints, it's challenging to be able to say that we are available to all countries. So that's one of the big challenges, I think, is to look at the opportunities, but try to find the resources to actually meet those needs. In terms of evaluation capacity development, I think we need to make sure we're avoiding simplistic solutions, going out there and putting together a huge training program to train 500 public officials, and that's your answer. I think it's about building capable states. And it's not just to say somebody has gone through a short course, but do they have the capability to draw up a good terms of reference and to manage an evaluation, for example? Or if they're in an evaluation unit, are they able to actually conduct that evaluation? So I think that that's a very important point. It's just not these quick fix solutions. Doing no harm versus doing good. I think we're walking this tightrope of saying, well, we've got to make sure that the systems, there are frameworks that they comply with, like the OECD DAC criteria and so forth. Those are certain normative frameworks or theories of change, or all of the kind of analytical tools that we use in M&E. But there's also a transformation imperative. So to what extent can we bring in some indigenous thinking and indigenous learning and indigenous knowledge systems into these systems? So I think that's one of the big challenges we're sitting with at the moment, that sometimes the systems that we are trying to establish are, they might not meet the contextual needs of that country, of that country's context. And we need to be very, very careful that we don't just introduce normative frameworks, and we take some time to introduce, contextually relevant ones. I think, I'm going to say a last point, and then I think I'll rest it there. The last point is really important. Building resilience to withstand political and government changes is a really important point. I think I touched on it a little bit, but we have seen that especially in the early stages of the establishment of a national evaluation system, you need to build in those kinds of, institutional resilience, or find ways to build it in, because it's very fragile in the beginning. So we've seen situations where, if there have been administrative or political shifts, elections and so forth, and then all of a sudden the impetus or the imperative for monitoring and evaluation gets lost, and it falls down like a house of cards. And I think that's one of our big challenges with institutions at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Candice. You anticipated an answer to a question I wanted to ask about building credibility. So let me ask you a different question. You highlighted resource constraints and the challenges you face there. If you had a lot more money, what would you do? Would you do more of what you're doing now in more countries, or would it change qualitatively how you work?
That is a great question. And I think unequivocally, I would say deeper work in fewer countries, because we have asked ourselves that question before as well. There's a lot of, like I said, institution building, and it's basically part of public sector reform. And that's a bigger question as well, because, the monitoring and evaluation systems sit inside a bigger governance, so, sort of challenges with integrated governance, challenges with coherence within the state, challenges with the state's relationship with non-state entities, and all of those, even within the bureaucratic machinery, weaknesses in the state. So those issues are mimicked in the monitoring and evaluation space. So you can't fix it just with M&E. You've got to try to fix it in planning as well as budget and policy making. So if we had a lot more money, we would have a bigger team who's able to address all of those pain points, if I can put it that way.
Thank you. Okay, we have a number of questions, and let me start here in the front, and then in the middle, and then Anna, and then in the back. So 4 questions, starting here in the front, and if they're long ones, we might give Candice a breath in the middle. Okay.
Thank you very much. Candice, nice presentation. I've interacted with Candice in the morning, and my name is Mahmoud Said. I'm from Somalia. World Bank supports the government of Somalia in various ways. And at this moment in time, there are 24 active projects in Somalia. Those are government implemented projects. The World Bank uses a country system in 4 or 3 areas. One, all financials, all finance go through government systems, Ministry of Finance, Office of the Accountant General. It is in the annual government budget. In terms of spending that money, it's the government who decides. Priorities are set by government, line ministries, based on the need. In terms of auditing, is the government Office of the Auditor General, which does auditing. And they normally do annual auditing of all projects. In terms of procurement system, procurement is done by line ministries, the various government agencies. But MNE, monitoring and evaluation, is not led by Department of Monitoring and Evaluation. It's done by third-party monitoring, hired by or contracted by line ministries. And reports they produce are not being used for evidence and evidence to action. And in other words, the MNE is not a country-led, a country-owned. So how do we go about it, and what can we learn from the core countries so far? And I think we need Kilia to actually come in and support us as Somalia, and we need your support, our technical support, more than ever. Because at this moment in time, we are building our national evaluation or national monitoring evaluation system, but we are receiving a scattered support, a small support from some UN agencies, some other donors, including even World Bank. But at this time, if Clear comes in, we will have one approach, and our systems will be built uniform like any other countries, and we'll have a system that can work and be credible and accessible to the Somali people. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next.
Thank you so much for your presentation, very helpful. My name is Xinxin Yang. I'm the multi-country evaluation specialist at UNICEF. You mentioned that back to 2010, when World Bank first initiated Clear Center, this initiative is actually involved all over the different parts of the world, including East Asia. We also have a Clear Center. So nowadays, 15 years later, you can see these centers have been moving into different directions, showing different models. So in addition to the work you have done in your region, I'm also interested in learning about how the Clear AA has achieved the transformation from at the initial stage, leveraging on World Bank's expertise to provide training like many other Clear centers have been doing, to today being so self-sustained, self-reliant to provide this very comprehensive technical assistance to the region, to the countries in the region. What have you done correctly? What are the enabling factors that allow you to do so? Related to this, I also want to know your partners, like the government or VOPE, what kind of role they have played in the Clear AA. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Why don't we take the last two questions all together, and then we'll run through the responses. Anna?
Thank you very much. It was a very interesting presentation, and I'm wondering about the capacities of the national evaluation systems in different countries, and whether you have any data or any studies about the finance of this system, so from where actually the money comes from, and whether the national governments are putting their own money from their own resources to build the system.
Okay, and then we had one more in the back. You've shifted up. Okay.
Thank you very much. Kai Jacobson from the Norwegian Department for Evaluation. Firstly, thank you very much, Candice, for your presentation. Thank you to all of the speakers. 4 short questions. One, you spoke of CLEAR's work in capacity development and training. And I was just wondering, when you were speaking about the materials you are developing, are these intended for delivery for training by CLEAR, or do you create your materials so that they can be used by government ministries, staff colleges, training academies, and incorporated into their own training to be able to reach a far wider number at the local and national levels? In the M&E systems analysis, MESA, you do, to what extent do you also engage significantly with analysis of the capacity to plan, development, design, and implement policies and strategies with evidence? So not the side of the M&E, but the capabilities to utilize and design and implement using that evidence. The last reflections and questions to you and the earlier speakers, we often look at harvesting lessons from evaluations to input into policy and strategy development. But when it comes to implementation, we see that the critical gaps are very often with the level of the state institutions or the actors that are involved in implementation. And we often don't bring out the harvesting of results and lessons to support strengthening the capabilities of those implementing. And I was wondering to what extent you might engage with that. You can have the most beautiful national policy and strategy on paper, but unless those involved at ministry and state services levels actually have those lessons learned and tools at their fingertips and the support on that, that's often where the gap is. The last, I really appreciated when you mentioned public sector reform. And I'm wondering for yourself and perhaps for all of us, can we do more to work mapping state institutions and processes and with those involved in governance reform and state and institutional development to integrate evidence-based evaluation and evidence-based policymaking into their standing systems and practices? So instead of the M&E field coming from the outside trying to input it, can we have earlier conversations with the larger areas of governance reform and state development to have M&E integrated as a component in their work as well? Thank you very much.
Okay. We are almost at time right now, so if you could bear with us while Candice takes a quick sip of water and then works through the responses to 4 questions. First, from our colleague at Somalia, prospects for something like CLEAR at these very early stages. How has CLEAR AA developed and evolved over time in the role of partners? Financing for national evaluation systems, and then training by CLEAR or training by trainers, analysis using evidence use capacity, implementation challenges, and inadequate M&E within systems themselves.
I'm going to try to be quick because all of these are such great questions and I could talk forever about them. But very, very quickly to my colleague from Somalia, you asked a very specific question about what you could do about the fact that the system is not country-led. I think from our experience, and I think you should definitely try to speak to Timothy and some of the other colleagues who are around, establishing it in the center of government, the office of the Prime Minister or the office of the President, and having that kind of head championship of it, and having some kind of pronouncement that this is the direction we're taking is a very, very strong point of leverage that can get the rest of the system. It's not the only thing that's going to work. You need, other things beyond that. But I think centering it in the center of government is a signal to the rest of government and other partners to say that we're serious about our M&E system. So I think that is one sort of shorthand tip, I could say. And then, of course, we also do have some anecdotal evidence that having some kind of legislative or policy or regulatory frameworks guiding the rest of government in terms of this might help as well. But again, it's not sufficient on their own. You need to have capacity development, awareness raising, buy-in, onboarding that accompanies that as well. But as where to start. Those are very good places to start. Great question about how we've transformed, and I know about the CLEAR Center here, and it's been, we know we've had meetings and with colleagues since I joined CLEAR, and then, there's changes happen and so forth. I think that every CLEAR Center is its own separate entity, even though we're driven by a network vision and ambition. So even with the GEI, for example, it's not a hierarchical relationship where they dictate what we do, but we have an understanding of where the ambition is, where we're going. So each center has had its own business model, and we took quite an aggressive approach, I would say, over time to say, we need to set ourselves apart for our local context. So we need to, we got some funding to do a regionalization strategy, because we found that we weren't getting ourselves out beyond where we were hosted in South Africa, and we needed to rapidly, just have a footprint beyond South Africa. So we got some funding, at the time it was from Swedish CEDA, who gave us some funding to think through a regionalization strategy. So the bottom line is that it was very intentional. It didn't just happen. We actually had to think it through. Where did we want to be? What did success look like for us? And so that is what transformed us, sitting down, saying that we don't just want to be trainers. We want to have a bigger impact. In fact, UNICEF, we've got a very strong partnership with UNICEF Izaro currently. We've got a PCA, and it's now going to enter into a long-term agreement. And those have been our sorts of partners, interlocutors, who've actually helped us to get our footing into countries, as well as sort of, doorkeepers, if I can put it that way. And then once we establish a relationship and trust, and then we can work further. In terms of capacities, where do the monies come from? Oh, that's a great question. So again, it's related to our business model. You were asking about the capacity, the resourcing by governments. So it depends. Some governments have their own funding that they ring fence for monitoring and evaluation. So the African government, for example, they have funding that goes to monitoring and evaluation. The challenge is that, and there are many other countries as well. Uganda sitting here, they have that as well. The challenge comes in the resourcing of the work itself. So very often, there's money to pay salaries for M&E staff, but no money to do the work, to conduct evaluations or to develop the monitoring system or design a new data system. So that's the big challenge with resourcing it. And that's where partners coming in are so important. So a lot of our work is bringing in partners who are willing to work with the officials in the system to kind of do the work. But yeah, a lot of governments are putting some money, but not enough. It's still a big challenge. Quickly, those 4 questions, the materials, we try to have a training of trainers approach, but it also depends on what the ask is. So the example that I mentioned with 3IE, that was us giving the materials that Zambia does that. It's part of there. We don't own that at all. We've got no IP there. They own that. It's that academic department that runs that impact evaluation course. So that's the ideal, obviously, but sometimes we do. So it's a very open system. It depends on what the ask is. The MISA, yes. Short answer, we do that. In the MISA, I'd love to send you a copy. It's actually, you can Google it, you can find it, but I will, I will engage. We can talk about, is that enough? Because we do have some questions specifically related to design planning and use. So we do look at that as well in the analysis. Public sector reform, yes, we need to map it out better. That's a huge challenge. So very often when the deeper we go into a relationship with a country government, we discover these things, and these things need to be mapped out. And I see my colleague here from an initiative called Twende Mbele sitting right at the back. They've actually done a fantastic piece of work on budget, the alignment between budget policies and national evaluation systems, and they're piloting some work, and they're doing some peer learning between countries about how to better do that, because it is actually a key point of leverage. I think I've covered it all.
Okay, thank you very much, Candice. We're just at time, in fact, a little over now, but Anka or Didier, any last words you would like to add for anything that occurred to you during the conversation?
Je pense que ce qui est très important aujourd'hui dans notre région, c'est que les décideurs veulent avoir une vue globale. Mais ce qu'on leur offre, c'est des évaluations ponctuelles. Or, les politiques, c'est vraiment une vue globale. Et pour cela, ils sont vraiment très demandeurs, comme l'a dit Candice, du suivi et de l'évaluation. Ce n'est pas seulement l'évaluation. Et je pense que dans nos discours, nous ne mettons pas beaucoup d'accent sur le suivi, qui est un outil de gestion de la politique. Donc, si vous n'arrivez pas à accompagner les décideurs pour pouvoir bien gérer leur politique, lorsque vous voulez les évaluer, ils sont un peu réticents à utiliser les enseignements de l'évaluation. Donc, ce qui serait intéressant, c'est que les partenaires puissent se mettre ensemble pour aider à concevoir les systèmes de suivi et évaluation, à montrer aux États comment faire l'auto-évaluation et progressivement, je pense que les autres éléments vont venir se mettre dans la chaîne. Merci.
Nothing to add now, but feel free to come and find me with any questions afterwards. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Please join me in thanking our panelists today.